welcome to the Shropshire Ghost Tales podcast. I am your host, Galactica. This episode will cover the history and hauntings of Buildwas Abbey. Before we commence with the podcast, I would like to ask all the listeners out there to please support the channel by subscribing to Shropshire Ghost Tales and giving us a like. Also, I would like to mention that we are now on YouTube. The YouTube podcasts will not only feature the podcast, but will give you listeners a tour of the haunted places in the video. Next month, we will be doing a Christmas special podcast. In this podcast, I will be choosing one of the Christmas ghost stories that you listeners have submitted to me. With that being said, let's commence with the podcast. The ruins of Buildwas Abbey are located at the small village of Buildwas in Shropshire, England, not far from the village of Ironbridge. It is currently run by the English Heritage Trust and currently has free entry. It is said to be haunted by a monk which was murdered at the abbey, which I will speak about later in this podcast. In 1135, Bishop Roger G. Clinton, then the Bishop of Coventry and Lichfield, founded the Buildwas Abbey. Ingenulf was the abbot at the time, and the abbey was devoted to the Virgin Mary and St. Clad, a bishop from the 7th century whose relics are kept at Lichfield Cathedral. The 7th ex-monarch, King Stephen, which reigned from 1135 to 1154, who confirmed the abbey's foundation in 1138, helped the monastery gain the backing of wealthy local families. However, Buildwas was a poor and underfunded monastery despite this. 8 years after Buildwas Abbey was incorporated into a larger Cistercian order in 1147, a man named Ranulph was chosen to lead the monastery as its abbot, a position he held until 1187. The stone for the abbey's principal structures and church came from the quarries close to Broseley, and Ranulph oversaw their construction. By the time of Ranulph's death, Buildwas Abbey had reached its peak of prosperity and was a centre of knowledge. The monks from Buildwas Abbey built the Buildwas Bridge across the River Severn, connecting them to Wenlock Monastery, which was about 3 miles away. But they also generated money through toll payments. Buildwas Abbey made its majority of its money from farming and selling the wool from the sheep and other livestock. Buildwas Abbey, however, began to suffer around the 14th century. It is stated that a new abbot named John Burnell took over the monastery at the time, and there was a livestock disease that was killing out the animals that the monks depended on for income. A monk by the name of Sir Thomas Tonge allegedly saw the issue and went out to assist the monks, which sparked conflict between Thomas Tonge and the abbot, John Burnell. John Burnell is reported to have neglected the situation, which caused the monks additional anguish. A meeting with the abbot was then reported to have been scheduled in 1342 by Thomas Tonge and a small number of his supporters. The abbot and Thomas Tonge got into an heated argument over this, and Thomas Tonge fatally stabbed the abbot. To this day, it is said that the spirit of the late abbot John Burnell roams the monastery looking for his killer. The psychic medium of one paranormal team that visited Buildwas Abbey was able to make a connection with the deceased abbot and pick up the words murder and betrayal from the ghost box. There is many speculations about what happened next after the murder. Some say that Thomas Tonge was imprisoned at the monastery and that he managed to escape and that he fled abroad. Others speculate that he was sent away and came back to the monastery at a later date, after he apparently was forgiven by God. What do you think? Please leave your comments in the comment section. After the murder, Buildwas Abbey had further setbacks when the bubonic plague struck Shropshire in the middle of the 14th century. The final drawback was in 1521, when Henry VIII disbanded the monasteries in England. The monks were moved from Buildwas to larger monasteries, which were disbanded later, and the abbot was made redundant and given a pension. Furthermore, the furnishings and bells from the abbey were sold off for £151. The majority of the abbey's assets, including its location, were sold to Sir Edward Grey, Lord of Powys, in July 1539. His estranged son Edward, who was also given the estate, turned the former abbot's residence and monastery hospital into a mansion. The Molesley family possessed the property by the late 17th century. It progressively lost its prestige, was partially destroyed, and was converted into a tenant farm. Beginning in the early 19th century, artists as well as numerous individuals began to show a fascination in the remains of Buildwas Abbey. The major monastery and church ruins were given to the county's preservation in 1925. English Heritage has been in charge of protecting the location for succeeding generations and providing tourists with information about the ruins since 1984. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast, and please remember to give us some support either by subscribing to the podcast channel or my YouTube channel Galactica. All music and sound effects are all my own creative work. See you soon.